All right, Wendy. Gio.
Okay. Thank you, Dave, and thanks to everyone for joining us by Zoom this evening. I hope you'll enjoy this exploration of fishing and modern architecture in Gloucester. I would also like to thank my friend and colleague Kathy Broomer, who did a lot of research on the Gortons of Gloucester complex for a project we worked on together in Gloucester, and the Cape Ann Museum, who provided most of the historic images that you will see. And finally, Jeff Weaver, who allowed me to use an image of one of his wonderful paintings. This talk is about the history and architecture of the Gortons of Gloucester complex between Main Street and the harbor, and its unexpected relationship to literary history. Gorton's is an iconic symbol of Gloucester's fishing industry and one of the oldest maritime-related businesses in the city. It is a direct descendant of John Pugh and Son, which was founded on this site in 1849. More than a century later, during the 1960s and early 70s, Jonathan Bayliss had a successful day job as an executive at Gorton's. At the same time, he was writing a series of complex books set in a fictionalized yet recognizable Gloucester. Gorton's buildings served as part of the backdrop for these stories and also illustrate Bayliss's overlapping interests in new languages of architecture, technology, and literature. Next slide, please. Thank you. Despite changing economics and the massive upheaval of urban renewal, which wiped out most of Gloucester's historic wharf buildings, Gorton's retains a fine collection of buildings that represents more than 100 years of fishing and fish processing. These buildings not only illustrate nearly all of Gorton's history, but also represent the city's rise to national prominence as a fishery in the 19th and 20th centuries. Next slide. This assessor's map shows how the Gorton's complex is laid out today. And the future slides are going to include some of these numbers so you can track the buildings from slide to slide. Here's the quick preview. A couple of utilitarian wood frame buildings that are numbered 1 and 2 on this map, constructed in the early 1870s and early 1890s, survive on the waterfront. A handsome late 19th century office building constructed of brick faces Main Street. That's number 4. It was and still is part of a dense and dynamic residential and commercial neighborhood. Our Lady of Good Voyage Church is visible up Spring Street. Next slide. Between Main and Rogers Street stands a sophisticated heroic style headquarters building, openly facing the harbor, yet solidly joined to its Victorian era predecessor. So the office building, the first office building is on the top left. The view up Main Street on the bottom left, thanks. And you can just barely see the towers of Our Lady of Good Voyage on the right. Okay, next slide, please. These are, the top right is the modern seafood processing center, and the one of the two early wood frame buildings on the right, and the bottom left shows the headquarters building, the most recent building facing the Rogers Street and the water. Next slide, please. This historic map shows the Gorton Pugh complex in 1899, a few years before John Pugh and Son merged with Slade Gorton and Company and 2 other smaller Gloucester firms to form the mighty Gorton Pugh Fisheries. So the brick office building is in the top of that oval. It's shaded in pink. And the earlier wood frame buildings are somewhere down below and near the waterfront. And obviously, Roger Street was not extended through here then, and there was Vincent Cove still existed off to the left of the oval, but it has been filled in. Next slide. John Pugh and Son was founded just 2 years after the railroad from Boston reached Gloucester. The railroad, combined with the adoption of ice refrigeration on ships, significantly expanded Gloucester's markets and produced greater profits for its catch. Gloucester's fisheries experienced phenomenal growth in the middle of the 19th century. By 1865, more than 90% of Gloucester's workforce was employed in fishing year-round. And by 1885, more than 600 vessels of all kinds were employed in fishing year-round. By the start of World War I, the number of Gloucester fishermen was estimated at more than 5,500, which was about 20% of the total population. The total number of workers throughout the local fish industry believed to have been about 10,000 at sea and on land. Next slide. John Pugh and Son was founded by the gentleman on the left, John Pugh, who began his career as a sailor. Following his marriage to Sarah Tarr in 1829, Pugh, quote, gave up foreign voyages and engaged in fishing, unquote, until founding the firm that bears his name in 1849 with his oldest son, William A. Pugh, in the center here. Two other sons, Charles H. Pugh and John James Pugh, later joined the company. In 1873, John Pugh and Son had the greatest number of vessels, 20 out of the 43 firms that were engaged in fishing and fitting out in Gloucester Harbor in that year. The company advertised itself as producers of and wholesale dealers in fish, as well as importers of salt. Next slide, please. Two wood frame buildings remain from this period, utilitarian but highly remarkable for surviving in an ever-changing industrial context for 150 years. The warehouse and sale loft at 127 Rogers Street was built around 1870. The photo on the top left shows what it looked like when it was pretty new. It is still clearly recognizable, although around 1892, it was attached to this large two-story cannery building with a distinctive undulating roof line. It's also now covered with vinyl siding. Next slide. This historic photo shows some of the activities that took place inside these buildings. It looks pretty messy. And we contrast that with a scene from the 1950s later on in the presentation. Next slide. A third building associated with John Pugh and Son is Pugh Hall, which faces Main Street. Constructed around 1879 to 1880, Pugh Hall served as the company's most highly visible building on a public street until Rogers Street was constructed in the 1960s. Incorporating a meeting hall on the second floor, the building housed grocery storage and ship stores on the first floor in the late 19th century. John Pugh and Son maintained a business office here by 1903, and local architect Ezra Phillips designed fancy offices on the second floor, which were occupied by Gorton Pugh by 1909 after the big merger. Gorton's of Gloucester used the building as its main office through the 1960s and kept its top management here even after adding the new headquarters building in 1970. Late 19th century city directories and atlases describe this brick block alternately as Pugh Hall and Asoriana Hall. The principal organizations using the upstairs meeting hall in 1905 were the Asoriana Beneficial Association, which was a fraternal benevolent order associated with Gloucester's Portuguese-speaking Azorean community, and the Portuguese Fraternity Branch Number 4. The building's use as a meeting hall seems to have ended around 1910. Next slide. Portuguese fishermen first arrived in Gloucester in 1829. By 1888, the city had around 200 Portuguese families, constituting the largest Portuguese community on the East Coast. Portuguese Hill was the first area outside of the harbor village to be developed for the late 19th century's growing working class. Gloucester's Portuguese community first worshipped at St. Anne's Church, whose congregation was originally Irish immigrants. In the 1880s and early 1890s, services in Portuguese were also held periodically at Pugh Hall by a priest who came up from Boston's North End. In 1889, Portuguese residents successfully petitioned the Archdiocese in Boston to to establish a separate Portuguese parish dedicated to Our Lady of Good Voyage, and its first permanent church was built up the street from Pugh Hall in 1893. After a fire, it was replaced by the present building in 1914. No doubt the Portuguese were a significant part of the workforce for Pugh and Son, and the proximity of Pugh Hall to Portuguese Hill was fortuitous for accommodating the neighborhood's religious services and social groups in the building. After John Pugh Sr. died in 1890, Charles Pugh expanded the company's plant to include not only fish and salt storehouses, but also fish skinning and packing. In 1906, John Pugh and Son merged with Slade Gorton and Company, David B. Smith and Company, and Reed and Gamage to form Gorton Pugh Fisheries Company under the management of Nathaniel Lincoln Gorton. In a sidebar, it caught my eye that Nathaniel Lincoln Gorton was born in 1865 and had the middle name Lincoln. Turns out that he was born 11 days after President Abraham Lincoln died. I liked how it tells you a little something about his parents and the national grief that attended Lincoln's assassination. Next slide. Slade Gorton founded the eponymous Slade Gorton and Company about 1868. Gorton was born in Rhode Island, trained as a weaver there, and moved to Cape Ann in the 1860s. He worked as a superintendent at the Annisquam Steam Cotton Mill, which was destroyed by fire in 1883. Part of that mill complex is now Rockport's public library. Slade's wife, either his first wife Maria or his second wife Margaret, also ran a company boarding house near the mill. Slade seems to have had a fish business on the side for many years, selling fish wholesale to taverns, hotels, and restaurants. The establishment of the Slade Gorton Company is variously stated as 1868 or 1874. It seems to have become a full-time concern after the mill fire. That was in 1883. Next slide, please. Oh, so could you go back a bit, David? So Slade Gorton himself is second from the left, and his sons are on the ends of this picture. Okay, next slide. Slade Gorton and Company was reported to be the first major firm to pack salt-dried codfish, and it became one of the largest in the country. A family history describes the founder as, quote, warm, affable, young, full of drive and ambition. That he was good at fish dealing is indisputable. His sons proved to be masters of marketing, unquote. Next slide, please. Slade's two sons, Thomas Slade Gorton and Nathaniel Lincoln Gorton, ran the company after their father's death and acquired a patent for the original Gorton fish cake in 1899. Gorton Pugh's salted cod, mackerel, and codfish cakes were considered among the country's first convenience foods. In 1904, the brothers purchased the painting Man at the Wheel, which was created in 1901 by Rocky Neck artist A.W. Bueller. It came to be the trademark insignia of Gorton's, as well as a symbol of the heroism of Gloucester fishermen. And it's still on the sign on Rogers Street. In the early 20th century, Gorton Pugh eventually came to occupy most of the head of the harbor, which is where the state fish pier is now. Next slide, please. The founder's son, Thomas Gorton, was the namesake for the company's schooner, Thomas S. Gorton, the last of Gorton's all-sail fleet, built in Essex in 1905. In 1929, she competed in the American trials for one of the legendary international fishing schooner races, but her age was already showing and she came in last. The company sold the vessel in 1935. Unfortunately, the Gorton family lost control of Gorton Pugh Fisheries following a near bankruptcy in 1923. In a period when salt cod, Gloucester's major industry, was already in decline due to the increasing demand for fresh fish. The company's precarious state was also partly the result of the seizure of a huge shipment of salt cod on one of their boats by Benito Mussolini's government in 1923, causing a drastic cash flow problem. State Street Bank and Trust Company of Boston acquired Gorton Pugh and took over its management. The last member of the Gorton family, Thomas Slade Gorton Jr., left the company around 1929. He had already moved to Chicago, where he opened another Gorton's Fish Company. Under the new management in the early 1930s, Gorton's of Gloucester began acquiring and developing large-scale facilities for the production and distribution of frozen fish. Flash freezing of food had been pioneered in Gloucester by Clarence Birdseye in the late 1920s. His factory was where the Beauport Hotel stands now. In 1949, Gorton celebrated its 100th anniversary with the first cross-country trailer truck shipment of frozen fish, an 8-day trip from Gloucester to San Francisco. Gorton Pugh was reportedly the first company to develop a frozen convenience food, Gorton's fried and frozen codfish fillets, in 1952. In 1953, Gorton's fish sticks won the Parents Magazine seal of approval. Next slide, please. And here are the Gorton's workers in the 1950s, hard at work. You notice how scientific and sanitary food production had become. By 1955, Gorton's had 500 employees at its main plant in Gloucester and another 500 at production facilities in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Quebec. At that time, the company still produced salted and canned seafood products and boasted, quote, complete research and technical laboratories and facilities in Gloucester and sales representatives in every major market nationwide. Next slide. A mid-century modern brick seafood processing center was built along the waterfront in 1956. Gorton Pugh Fisheries became Gorton's of Gloucester in 1957 and the Gorton Corporation in 1965. In 1968, the company merged with General Mills. Today, it is owned by a large Japanese seafood conglomerate, Nisui. Sadly, it no longer processes local fish. So here you can see the evolution of buildings. Pugh Hall on the upper right with the first edition from 1965. And then on the bottom right is the 1965 edition with the Catalano building to the far right. Dave, would you try the next slide, please? Okay, go back. All right. Urban renewal in the early 1960s pushed Rogers Street through the center of the company's holdings, separating the corporate offices in Pugh Hall from the processing buildings on the waterfront. So the modernist brick office addition was built behind Pugh Hall in 1965. It's originally faced Rogers Street, had a big entrance facing Rogers Street, and then added the much larger 3-story concrete headquarters building facing Rogers Street, also in 1970. This was the building designed by Eduardo Catalano, a modern architect who shook up the world of architectural design, much like Jonathan Bayliss did in the literary world. So finally, here we are at the connection between fish, Bayliss, Catalano, and heroic architecture. Next slide. Jonathan Bayliss, seen here on Rogers Street, facing where the headquarters building would go, moved to Gloucester in 1956. While establishing himself as a writer, he made a living in various businesses, including controller at Gorton's of Gloucester beginning in the 1960s. At Gorton's, Bayliss distinguished himself as a pioneer in developing integrated business applications for the IBM System 360, a revolutionary family of mainframe computers that shared basic software. As IBM describes it, quote, before the System 360, anyone buying a new computer system had to scrap their existing programs and start from scratch. There were no commercial software companies, and software was customized or custom written for each new machine. The System 360 changed that dynamic overnight by separating software from hardware. For the first time, software written for one machine could run on any other machine in the line. This enabled companies to buy a small computer system and add to it as needed. The System 360 created fresh ways of thinking about designing, building, and using computer systems, and its influence is still felt today. So I had to add, in the small world department, my father, Gloucester native Paul Frontiero, was an engineering manager at IBM, developing the 360's Model 40 at the very same time. And there he is on the bottom right in the center of the photo. All these fresh ways of thinking sound familiar in relation to Bayliss. As controller, Bayliss might naturally have had some role in the physical operation of the Gorton's company. Perhaps he was even instrumental in hiring the architect for the company's new headquarters, deliberately allying Gorton's with a new way of thinking architecturally. Not coincidentally, the establishment of Rogers Street in Gloucester's 1960s urban renewal program tore down a melange of crowded utilitarian industrial buildings and a warren of streets, lanes, and passageways. It provided a fresh canvas for positioning Gorton's technologically, physically, and symbolically. Next slide. Working closely with the architect Eduardo Catalano, Bayliss supervised the design and construction of the new Gorton's headquarters building from 1969 to 1971. In a letter to Catalano, Bayliss praised the architect's systemic approach to design and his combination of, quote, the ideas of permanence, efficiency, economy, austerity, with beauty as their byproduct, unquote. In return, Catalano wrote to Bayliss in admiration of the structural geometry of his writing, its symbolism, and its, quote, tremendous rhythm that pleases me no end, unquote. Eduardo Catalano was born in Argentina in 1917 and immigrated to the United States to study at the University of Pennsylvania and at Harvard. He returned to Argentina for several years, where he obtained a second master's degree in architecture, taught at the University of Buenos Aires, and opened his own practice. In 1950 and 51, he taught at the prestigious Architectural Association in London. He returned to the United States to teach at North Carolina State University School of Design from 1951 to 1956, and then at MIT School of Architecture from 1956 until 1977. Next slide. Catalano maintained an architectural office in Cambridge until 1995. His impressive portfolio included a variety of civic, office, and university buildings, including the Stratton Student Center at MIT in 1963, the Juilliard School of Music in New York City, 1969, with Pietro Belluschi, the Guilford County Greensboro Government Center in North Carolina in 1970, One Washington Mall in downtown Boston, 1972, across from City Hall, and American embassies in Buenos Aires, 1970, the same year as Gorton's, and South Africa in 1982. Next slide. Catalano's best-known work is probably the house he designed for himself in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1954, while he was teaching at NC State. At the time, Catalano was experimenting with unusual geometric shapes and structural properties. The Catalano house featured a hyperbolic paraboloid roof, which is shaped something like a shoehorn. Constructed of straight elements that formed a curved structure, the roof rests only on two concrete buttresses, which were connected underground by metal cables. The walls of the Catalano house were primarily glass, with a variety of open and private spaces provided by the shaping of the roof. As noted in a recent book on Raleigh's architecture, quote, the house was widely published and lauded at its construction. Life magazine called it the Batwing House. Catalano likened the form to an autumn leaf, unquote. The building was also disparagingly nicknamed the Potato Chip House. One of my favorite anecdotes about this building is Catalano's encounter with a delivery man who came to the house, which stood in a traditional residential neighborhood, looked around and volunteered to Catalano, sorry about the hurricane. Nonetheless, in 1956, House and Home magazine named this building the House of the Decade. Even the legendary and ever dismissive architect Frank Lloyd Wright was impressed. After visiting the building, he declared that, quote, "It is refreshing to see that the shelter has been so imaginatively and skillfully treated as in the house by Eduardo Catalano," unquote. Next slide. Here are more of those soaring geometric roofs that were a thing in the 1950s. And I'm making another small world connection that I grew up in Raleigh, where Catalano taught, and my high school graduation took place in Gorton Arena, shown here, built in 1952, which boasts a plain old paraboloid roof, unlike Catalano's hyperbolic paraboloid roof. After his move to Cambridge, Catalano turned towards concrete as a building material. He became a proponent of the heroic style of architecture, which had its heyday between 1960 and 1976, concurrent with urban renewal in cities across the country. The heroic style reinvented architectural language with an idealism and creativity that mirrored John F. Kennedy's New Frontier and Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs. It had big dreams of architecture as a vehicle for social and urban transformation. Honesty in materials and bold forms were hallmarks of the style. Concrete was the material of choice for its combination of structural and sculptural qualities. Next slide, please. Contemporary with Gloucester's Gorton Corporation headquarters is the Charlestown Branch Library, one of Catalano's best-known works in the Boston area. Built in a dense urban neighborhood as part of Boston's urban renewal program, Catalano's dynamic design exhibits broad expanses of concrete panels and glass, which produced an abundance of natural sunlight indoors. A cantilevered entrance canopy, which you can see on the slide on the right, and a U-shaped concrete roof structure that appears to float above glass panels and is supported on concrete feet by very minimal steel connectors. The connectors are shown on the bottom left. There's two little I-beams holding up this giant U-shaped trough for the roof and the walls. Architects have praised this building for its, quote, "precision, impeccable execution, and refined detail," unquote. Gorton's headquarters is not quite so robust, which is not surprising for corporate as opposed to civic architecture, but it exhibits similar attention to detail, innovation, and modernity. Next slide. Thank you. The Catalano building at Gorton's encompasses 25,000 square feet and was constructed of exposed concrete and brick at a cost of $1 million, which is worth more than $8 million today. At the opening of the new building, the Gloucester Daily Times proclaimed it to be, quote, "a symbol of synthesis, coupling the 100-year-old Gorton Pew Fisheries Company building to the latest techniques of progressive architecture and innovative corporative thinking," unquote. The newspaper headlined that the architect was world famous. Square in shape, Catalano's building rises 2 stories above a partially raised basement to a flat roof. And I'm going to talk about a few of my favorite details. The basement level on the west side is notable for its 6 bays of narrow windows recessed behind angled brick piers. The angling provides a degree of privacy to the ground level interior spaces and also helps shade the interior from strong afternoon sunlight. That would have been important for the early computers that were housed here. By using brick as a material for these piers and for the base of the first floor where it meets the ground, the building is symbolically tied to the earth. Next slide. Thank you. The top floor overhangs the lower 2 levels, supported by concrete piers that stand free of the glass walls that sail behind. He also cantilevered the corners, as you can see in the upper story, as you can see in the slide on the top left. In the slide at the bottom right, the entry vestibule on the Rogers Street facade is visually freed from the main block by glass panels inserted between the 2 volumes. And you can see it far off to the right of that pyramidal evergreen shrub. It's a small detail, but it makes a difference in lightening up the heaviness of concrete. Next slide. Notice also the pattern of circular indentations on the precast concrete panels that form the skin of the building. They express the construction technology of lifting precast panels into place on site. A crane would have had hooks that dug into these indentations. It's an example of structural honesty with an aesthetic result. Dave, if you could go back to slide 25. That button. At the time the building was completed, Gorton's had $100 million in sales, employed more than 2,800 people worldwide, operated 16 plants in the US and 8 in foreign countries, and still owned 30 ships. It was Gloucester's largest employer with more than 650 workers. The president of the company, A. Ross Clouston, proclaimed that, quote, "the future looks just as good to us as the past, and that's why we've made this significant investment in our growth," unquote. Using familiar maritime terminology, Clouston described the new office building, quote, "as the Gorton Corporation flagship, bringing together on the bridge for the first time all the major managerial, marketing, administrative, and technical heads in the corporation," unquote. The maritime theme for the company also include placing a signal mast on the roof above the front entrance. It's not too bold, but you can see it in the image on the top left. Bayliss hated that signal mast and described it to Catalano as hideous and just as cute can be. Still, it survived. The newspaper report at the time of the opening the time of the building opening also marveled at the company's, quote, "vast computer services," unquote, which occupied almost the entire basement level. It was noted that the 3-story building was constructed to accommodate additional floors on top to anticipate future growth. And it was conspicuously pointed out that the building was air conditioned. The president of the company later wrote of the building that, quote, "people either loved it or hated it. The design was clean, modern, and had a flexible interior space. The extensive use of glass helped make the interior bright and friendly," unquote. Catalano said of it in an interview shortly before the opening that, quote, "the architecture of Gloucester cannot and should not be imitated. An architect should respect the past, but must express the spirit of his own time," unquote. One of the newspaper articles of the time juxtaposed photographs of the 1880 and 1970 buildings with the title, "Old, New, Blend in Fish City." Next slide, please. The next one. One more. Okay, thank you. Gloucester has only a few other modern public buildings from this period. The First Baptist Church on Gloucester Ave, circa 1966, the police station and courthouse on Main Street, 1970, and the Carroll Steel office building on Pleasant Street, 1958. Next slide. Like Gorton's, the Carroll Steel building was also designed by a modernist architect, Hugh Stubbins. Stubbins is famous in the architecture world for designing the Federal Reserve Building in Boston, seen on the right, and the Citicorp skyscraper in New York City, both in 1977. He was teaching at Harvard at the same time that Catalano was at MIT. How the small city of Gloucester got 2 nationally celebrated architects to design office buildings for local companies is a minor miracle. Next slide. The police station and courthouse building stands on Main Street, was designed at the same time as Gorton's headquarters. It employed a sculptural, heroic-style massing of large, simple brick volumes that spill down its hillside site towards Rogers Street. Its architect, a native man, had a bigger challenge from his clients than Catalano, however. When the city council first saw the renderings for the police station, the Gloucester Daily Times reported that its members described it as, quote, "too severe, too modern, and just plain ugly," unquote. The city manager was asked to send the drawing back to the architect and, quote, "come up with something that won't clash with the traditional lines of most Gloucester structures," unquote. Somehow, however, the architect managed to prevail in the end. Next slide. Clearly, Jonathan Bayliss was attracted to Eduardo Catalano's rejection of tradition for its own sake, and to Catalano's search for flexible new systems that boldly expressed modern conditions. The two men became friends as well as business colleagues and exchanged correspondence for many years after this building project. Both men were known for experimenting with form and, as a Bayliss obituary poetically expressed, for combining intellect and exuberance, precision and imagination, complexity and simplicity, abstraction and lyricism, systems and metasystems. Their collaboration on the Gorton's headquarters was a serendipitous chapter in Gorton's history. To sum up, despite profound changes in technology and business practices, the Gorton's complex encompasses modestly scaled but rare and important buildings with a remarkable range of physical fabric intact. The intertwining of maritime, social, and literary histories on this site creates another level of meaning that is so typically and extraordinarily Gloucester. So that ends my presentation tonight. If there are any questions or comments, please feel free to speak up. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm going to stop the recording now so folks can